She burned my house down, literally, and thought no one would ever hold her accountable. But the day she stood in court, her smug grin was gone. This is how the woman who tried to burn my life to ashes finally got burned by justice. Before I start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? She stood in that courtroom like she owned the place. Shoulders back, chin high, that smug little smile that used to make my blood boil. The same woman who had burned my house to the ground. The same woman who'd looked me in the eyes and said, maybe next time you'll follow the rules. Her name was Karen Rogers, president of the neighborhood HOA, self-proclaimed guardian of order. But behind her polite smiles and clipboard of fines, she was pure poison. And today, she was finally going to face the truth. 3 months earlier, I'd bought a worn-down farmhouse on the edge of town. It was old, cracked, and half the wiring was a fire hazard, but it was mine, a fresh start after losing my wife. The realtor had told me it sat just outside the HOA's control. I double-checked the county maps myself. It was clear as day. No dues, no board, no Karen. Or so I thought. The first time she came by, she looked me up and down like I'd tracked mud across her white carpet. Clipboard in hand, she said, "You can't park that truck here." I told her politely it was my property, and she had no authority beyond her fences. She didn't like that answer. Her jaw tightened, and she said something about community standards. I shut the door before I said something I'd regret. From that day, it was war, only I didn't realize it yet. She started slow. Letters taped to my door about unauthorized renovations. HOA newsletters slipped into my mailbox even though I wasn't a member. Neighbors stopped waving. A few started crossing the street when they saw me. It was like she was poisoning the well, drip by drip. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd just finished a 12-hour night shift at the steel plant. The smell of smoke hit me before I even turned down my road. My heart sank. Flames were ripping through the roof of my house, the orange glow visible for miles. I slammed on the brakes and ran toward the property, screaming for help. And there she was, standing at the edge of the street, phone in hand, pretending to call 911. She didn't look shocked, not scared, just satisfied. When she saw me, she smirked and said, "Guess you should have joined the HOA." Those words burned deeper than the fire ever could. I tried to rush past her, but the heat was too much. My tools, my photos, even the last letter my wife ever wrote me, all gone within minutes. The fire department came too late. They said the flames had spread too quickly, like an accelerant had been used. But without proof, it was ruled suspicious circumstances. Cameras melted, witnesses non-existent. And Karen? She made sure to show up every day after that, walking her dog by the blackened remains, whispering to neighbors about how I probably caused it myself. At first I wanted to believe justice would come on its own. That karma would do what I couldn't. But weeks passed, and she got bolder, filing fake complaints about my property, calling the county inspector. Even trying to claim my land violated her HOA boundaries. I started to feel like maybe she was right. Maybe people like her really did run everything. Until the day I remembered something she didn't know about. 2 weeks before the fire, I had installed a new solar panel system. It came with a backup battery control box, metal casing, heat-resistant, and inside it was a small service camera for maintenance checks. It wasn't connected to the main circuit, which meant it had survived the fire. When I pried open that melted box with trembling hands, the tiny SD card inside was intact. I plugged it into my laptop, not expecting much. But then I saw it. The footage showed someone walking up my driveway in the middle of the night. Hoodie, gloves, gas can. She moved carefully, looking around, then poured something across my porch. When the lighter flicked, her face was visible in the reflection of the flames. Clear as day. Karen Rogers, the woman who thought she was untouchable, had just signed her own sentence. For the first time since the fire, I slept that night. Not peacefully, but with purpose. The kind that burns cold and steady. I made copies, backed them up on 3 drives, and walked into the sheriff's office the next morning with proof that would change everything. That's how I ended up in that courtroom 3 months later, staring across the aisle at the woman who'd tried to erase me. But today wasn't just about revenge. It was about reminding her that people like me don't roll over. We rebuild. And sometimes, we rise stronger than the fire itself. The courtroom was packed that morning. A low hum of whispers bouncing off the walls like static before a storm. The judge's bench loomed high above, oak polished to a mirror shine. Cameras lined the back row, local reporters hungry for a scandal. Everyone wanted to see how the queen of the HOA would handle being on the other side of authority. Karen sat at the defense table, her hair perfectly styled, pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. You'd never guess she was the same woman caught on camera pouring gasoline across my porch. But I'd seen the footage, I'd lived through her fire, and today I was going to watch her world burn. Her lawyer, a slick, overconfident type, stood up first. Your Honor, my client has served this community for over a decade. These allegations are not only false, but malicious. He shot me a glance like I was the villain in the story. The so-called evidence is nothing but coincidence and doctored digital trickery. The judge didn't even blink. We'll see, he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. When he called my name, I stood and walked to the witness stand. My hands were steady, but inside, my chest was tight enough to crack ribs. The bailiff swore me in, and I took a deep breath. I told them everything, from the first confrontation about my truck to the whispers that followed the fire. The words came slow at first, but then the truth started pouring out, heavy and unbroken. She didn't just try to control the neighborhood, I said. She tried to control people. She made us afraid to say no. When I wouldn't bend, she decided to break me instead. Karen sat motionless, expression carved from stone. But when the prosecutor wheeled in the evidence cart, the small, charred solar control box, I saw her flinch, just slightly. The prosecutor nodded to the tech officer, who loaded the video onto the screen. The lights dimmed, and the room fell silent. The footage began grainy, then sharpened as the figure appeared. The glow of a phone screen, the shape of a woman crouched near my porch, a red gas can tilting in her hand. The lighter flicked. Flames roared to life. The reflection captured her face perfectly. Karen Rogers, frozen in the act. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Her lawyer tried to object, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the screen. When the video ended, the silence was suffocating. You could hear the buzz of the old ceiling lights, the slow creak of the judge's chair as he turned toward her. Mrs. Rogers, he said slowly, do you wish to explain this? Her voice came out small, trembling. That's not me. It's been altered. Deep fake or something like that. She glanced desperately at her lawyer, who pretended to shuffle papers just to avoid her eyes. The judge wasn't buying it. Your vehicle's headlights appear in the background immediately after the ignition, he said, and the timestamp matches the night of the fire. I looked right at her then. For months she'd walked past the ruins of my home like a victor surveying her conquest. But here, under the sterile light of the courtroom, all her power drained away. I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to feel satisfaction. Instead, I just felt tired. Justice wasn't about feeling good. It was about finishing what was started. Then, just when I thought it was over, the prosecutor stood again. Your Honor, if I may, the investigation uncovered additional evidence. He handed over another USB drive. The second video played, a grainy clip from a back alley behind the HOA office. It showed Karen meeting with a man in a city maintenance jacket. She handed him an envelope thick with cash. The man's face turned toward the camera. It was the same fire inspector who'd written the initial report saying there was no sign of arson. The judge's gavel hit the bench so hard the sound echoed like thunder. Enough! I've seen more than enough. Karen's composure shattered. You can't do this, she shouted, voice cracking. You don't understand. I run this community. The bailiff stepped forward, firm but calm, taking her by the arm. She jerked away, thrashing like a cornered animal. You think this makes you a hero? She hissed at me as they cuffed her wrists. I met her eyes. No, I said softly. It just makes you guilty. The crowd murmured. Some of the same neighbors who'd believed her lies sat there, faces pale, realizing what she'd done. The judge spoke again, voice steady and final. Mrs. Rogers, you are hereby remanded to custody pending sentencing. This court will not tolerate abuse of power under the guise of community service. They led her out, heels scraping against the tile. The door shut behind her with a hollow slam. And just like that, the noise stopped. No more whispering, no more lies. The courtroom was quiet, eerily quiet. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the wreckage is still fresh, but the air finally feels clean again. When the judge adjourned, people started leaving in hushed clusters. My lawyer clapped me on the back and said, "You did good." I nodded, staring at the empty doorway where she'd been dragged out. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, sharp, heavy, and overdue. Outside, the sun hit my face for the first time in what felt like years. The air smelled like rain on asphalt, clean and alive. I looked toward the horizon where my rebuilt farmhouse stood waiting. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was home again. A month later, I stood where it all began, on the same patch of earth that had once been nothing but ash and silence. The new house wasn't fancy, but every board, every nail had meaning. I built it myself, piece by piece, between court hearings and long nights staring at old blueprints. The smell of sawdust had replaced the smoke. The hum of my new generator filled the mornings instead of sirens. It wasn't just a home. It was proof that I'd survived. Karen was gone, sentenced to 12 years for arson, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The news spread fast. The HOA board tried to distance themselves. But when the investigation uncovered bribes, falsified inspection reports, and years of petty extortion, the whole organization collapsed. Houses that once flew those neat little HOA flags took them down overnight. People stopped pretending they didn't know. They started talking, admitting the truth. She'd bullied them too. One afternoon, as I painted the new porch railing, a familiar voice called from the road. It was Mike, a neighbor who'd once glared at me every time I drove by. He held his hat in his hands, looking ashamed. "Didn't think you'd stay after all that," he said. His voice carried a kind of guilt I understood all too well. I smiled, setting down the brush. "People like her don't get to decide who belongs here," I said. He nodded, then added quietly, "We should have believed you." I didn't have the heart to tell him it didn't matter anymore. What was done was done. The fire had taken a lot from me, but it had burned away her hold on everyone else too. The days grew quieter. I planted a new tree where the old one had been scorched black. Every morning I'd sip my coffee on the porch and watch the sunlight creep across the fields. Sometimes I'd still smell the phantom smoke or hear the crackle in my dreams. But then the wind would shift, carrying the sound of birds and the soft creak of the swing I'd built. That was enough to remind me that peace doesn't come easy. It's something you build and guard, one day at a time. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky turned copper, I found myself replaying the trial in my mind. The look on Karen's face when the video played, the exact moment she realized her power was gone. She wasn't a monster in that instant. She was just small, human. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just pity. She'd spent her life controlling others because she was terrified of losing control herself. The fire, the lies, the manipulation, it was all a cage she'd built around her own fear. I'd escaped mine the night I found that camera. The county awarded me a settlement for the damages, though no amount of money could replace what was lost. Still, it helped rebuild. I used part of it to set up a small charity fund for local fire victims. Nothing huge, just enough to help people start again the way I had. My lawyer called it poetic justice. I called it balance. Winter came, crisp and still. One night, as snow began to fall, I lit the fireplace and sat by the window, staring at the light flickering across the glass. The reflection reminded me of the flames that had once destroyed everything. But this time, the fire didn't burn. It warmed. I realized then that justice isn't a single moment in a courtroom. It's what happens after, in the quiet spaces where you choose not to let the past define you. A letter came in the mail a few weeks later, from the county corrections office. Karen Rogers was requesting to write me an apology as part of her rehabilitation program. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to tear it up without reading, but another part, the part that had once believed in second chances, hesitated. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. I tucked it in the drawer of my desk, next to the memory card that had changed everything. As spring rolled in, the fields bloomed again. The grass grew tall around the fence line, the same fence she'd once said violated community standards. I laughed the first time I mowed it. Some rules just weren't worth following. One night, while closing up the workshop, I noticed the stars, brighter than I'd ever seen them. No HOA streetlights, no noise, no interference, just clean, quiet sky. I leaned against the porch railing, the cool air wrapping around me like a promise. My dog, Bailey, padded up beside me, tail thumping softly. He'd been rescued from the shelter after the fire, another soul starting over. I scratched behind his ears. "We made it, boy," I whispered. "We really made it." The wind rustled through the trees, the same ones that had watched it all happen. I thought of my wife, her laugh, her love for this kind of peace. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of loss pressing down. I just felt still. Safe. I turned toward the door, light spilling through the windows, warm and gold. "She tried to burn my home to the ground," I said softly, almost to myself. But all she did was light my fight. I smiled then, the kind of smile that comes from surviving the worst and realizing you're still standing. When I finally stepped inside and closed the door, it wasn't with the fear that something might be taken from me again. It was with the quiet certainty that I'd already taken it all back. The house creaked gently as the wind brushed against it, alive, strong, and mine. That night, I slept without dreams, and for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't wake up thinking about the fire. I woke up thinking about the future. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button for more true justice stories, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place?